Good morning, and welcome to Coffee with Bob. Yesterday, I talked about how September 7th was the anniversary of when the Nazis began their bombing campaign against England. They bombed for 57 days in a row and for a period of 8 months in total. Well, today, September 8th, is the anniversary of another terrible tragedy. It was the great hurricane that hit Galveston, Texas. It was September 8th, 1900. Now, there's a very intriguing book called Isaac's Storm by Eric Larson, and it is just a fascinating book, not only about the Galveston hurricane, but really about the beginnings of the National Weather Service. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, weather forecasting was prohibited by the U.S. Weather Bureau because it was seen as stepping into the reign of God. Who could predict weather except God? And so they were sent to record weather, but it was seen as presumptuous to think that anybody could predict weather. In addition to that, the telegraph was necessary, so they had to have telegraph lines to communicate with one another. But even then, no one could report a hurricane warning or hurricane report other than the main office in Washington, D.C. And so a hurricane on the Gulf, you would have to send the message all the way back to the head office, and they would decide whether or not to report it. So it was a very antiquated system, kind of in its beginnings, and there was an evolving science that was being developed, but a lot of superstitions still were in place. Well, Isaac Klein was the chief meteorologist, and he was sent to the station in Galveston, Texas. Now, a few years before the 1900 hurricane, this city was trying to decide about building a seawall to protect it from tropical storms. And Isaac Klein went on record to say that he had studied the geography, the weather patterns, and the kind of the ocean front, and he said there was absolutely no way any kind of tropical storm would do damage of any real measure in Galveston. A hurricane just couldn't hit that city. And he went on record, and the decision was made to not build a seawall. Well, Isaac Klein lived in Galveston with his wife, Cora, and their 3 daughters, and Cora was pregnant with their 4th child. On September 8th, the hurricane hit, and there were massive 16-foot storm surge waves and 140-mile-an-hour winds. More than 8,000 people lost their lives in the hurricane. Isaac Klein would go on to issue a hurricane warning against the rules and the protocol of the U.S. Weather Bureau. But in the end, can you imagine how he must have felt? How he had promoted that it was ludicrous to think a hurricane would ever hit, and his opinion was one of the leading reasons that they never built a seawall. He survived, as did his 3 daughters, but his wife and unborn child were killed in the storm. I can't imagine the overwhelming grief personally, but also professionally, that the whole town of Galveston was wiped out. And yet, he continued to stay in the weather service. He would eventually move to their main office in New Orleans, along the coast, their main office, and he would contribute great research and insight and really propel the National Weather Service, as it's called now, into the future, because he didn't give up at his greatest mistake. Hopefully none of us will ever make the kind of mistake that he did, that you could see him, being crushed over his personal loss of his wife and unborn child, and the loss of so many lives, 8,000 lives. In the wake of our mistakes, we have a choice. Do we shrink back and give up and go hide? Or do we recognize our fault and move forward with our psyche committed to doing things different in the future and commit ourselves to making a difference? It takes great courage to go forward after a mistake, especially a very public, painful one. But God can help us have the strength, and God can use our lives for good. Don't let mistakes hold you back in life. There's always a new tomorrow, a new way we can make a difference in the world. Don't be held back by your failures. Let them motivate you to do more in the future. I hope you have a great day.